Hi, thanks for checking out Next Level Carpentry. You know, I was told some time back that my mission, should I choose to accept it, would be to make doors for the back of this waterfall island in this modern kitchen. Listening to my client and her designer, we talked about a lot of options about what to do with the doors on the back of this island to make them unique, make them fit with the new, clean, modern style of the home, but give them a natural feel to go with features and furnishings in the home. Considering quite a few different options, we settled on elm for these doors, for the grain features and the colors to blend with everything that's going on here. So I set about looking for a source for elm slabs, looking for something that was definitely special and worth putting the time and effort in to making these doors so that they would show off and highlight the features of the wood. That process led me to CS Woods in Denver, Colorado, where through an involved process working with a great salesperson named Aaron, we came up with just the right slabs that are going to fit perfectly into the decor and design of this home. And because of the nature of the project and the level of finish that this gets, regular joinery wasn't going to be acceptable for getting a slab wide enough to do the back of this cabinet. And that whole process led to the theme of this video, which is doing live edge joinery to make the slab that'll turn into these doors the absolute best it can be. So let's do this. And what you see here are a couple of gorgeous slabs cut from a decent sized elm tree by the folks at CS Woods. These two pieces are sequentially cut, pieces number 6 and 7 out of an entire log, and they were chosen for the grain features, the length, the thickness, and the width to best fit the look that I'm after on these island doors. As you can see, neither one of the slabs is wide enough for the 32-inch tall height of these doors. To get a slab that big was kind of not practical for this particular project, so the sequential slabs can be joined together to create a piece big enough, which is this size. This piece of cardboard fits perfectly in the back side of that waterfall island cabinet, and I use this to size the overall piece that will be made in this video. You can see here, this is the natural edge line that'll be on the bottom of the cabinet doors, which is something unique. I've not seen that done before. And this line matches up to the contour of the bottom of this piece here. So using most of this slab and part of that slab to make up this total width. With this camera angle, you can see the natural contour of the edges of this tree. If I were to flip these slabs around just so, you'd see how they were cut next to each other out of a pretty decent sized elm log. But the reason I say that traditional joinery isn't acceptable for this project is that traditional joinery is just cutting a straight line on each piece and then matching them together and gluing them up. But with all this beautiful wavy contour of these boards, I don't want a straight line running through there to distract from the overall look and the beauty of the wood. So the process I'm going to be doing here is basically to cutting a swath out of the middle. I don't want the sapwood left in there. That would also create a distracting line through the piece. So basically I'm taking a 6 or 7 inch swath out of here to join the two pieces together. But the trick is, or the point of live edge joinery, is to use the natural contour of the wood to help disguise the glue joint that makes this one wide piece. So that swath that I take out will curve and flow through between these two pieces. And there's not a tool that makes that a straight edge. Obviously, I can do that on a table saw and a joiner, cut a perfectly straight edge, glue this baby together. The joint has to have the same quality to be a sturdy glue joint and to be invisible, but the trick is to get wavy edges to have that joint quality, and that's the process that I want to show in this video. Because of the thickness of the slab, the various grain features change as they go through the slab. There's kind of a smallish branch stub on this face of the slab. And you can see the change as it's gone through that 5/4 inch thickness. It gets smaller here but it's more pronounced and it's deeper. The match to that knot is somewhere else on the backside of one of these slabs. But working with the designer to figure out the best overall look of the piece, these pieces were flipped face for face, end for end, top for bottom, every which way you can imagine, to come up with the contour that works in the size that this, the overall panel for these doors is going to be. That's this panel here again. I sketched some of the knot features on here. Those are the ones from the wood. I just kind of sketched them on here and then took them back to the island. I also used the photo match process and all the magic of SketchUp to do this digitally. You can see in this graphic image here where I've been able to superimpose doors made out of these actual slabs, and those doors are made as a composition of digital images of the actual wood itself, built into a 3D model of the island cabinet, and then superimposed in a photo of the kitchen that I was just standing in when the video started. And that whole process leads me to this point where I've got to make the money cuts on these giant slabs. I don't want to join all 12 feet of this and then cut about 5 feet off the end. So I'm going to start off with pieces that are long enough to cut this size of a piece out of. As you might expect, I'm paying a lot more attention to the layout on these slabs and making these cuts right than I am to the little blue LED on my camera that tells me the audio isn't recording right. So the voiceover on this whole segment is really a mess. But basically, I'm talking about the layout of the knots and the features in the wood in relation to the doors on the cabinet and the cuts that I'll make on these slabs.
What I'm saying here is that the right side of the doors need to end up about here near this end of these slabs, and that puts this particular grain feature in a good place in the doors. And the reason I'm describing this is I need to align the slabs by sliding them back and forth like this. My goal is to match the contours to make the joint as invisible as possible and also be aware of where the cuts for the doors are going to be and where the grain features land in relation to the individual doors. And speaking of features, does anyone else think that this particular feature resembles a baboon nose? Or is that just me? If the doors are oriented with the bottom slab like this, then the cut between the center doors would be about here, and cuts for the other two doors would be about here and here. These pencil marks are within about an inch of where they'll end up when I'm done doing the live edge joinery on this big slab. To get the contour of these two slabs to match up though, I want to slide the top piece this way as much as possible.
But the further the slab goes that way, the closer the cut is going to be to this baboon nose knot here. And I said baboon nose knot, not baboon nose knot. But I want to keep from cutting the slab right next to that feature because I'm not comfortable with the instability I get there. So I can only go so far that way. And I'm going through all this discussion to determine where to cut this top slab for length. I'd like this knot to be as close to the door center as possible, and I don't have enough slab length here to push this knot clear over into the next door panel.
And I think I decided on a sweet spot, right about there, for the cut between the center doors. That will help these two dips and these two bumps line up, and cuts for other doors will be more workable. I'll determine the exact final position of the two slabs when I get back to the shop. The location of this end of the slab is fine, but the crux of this project is determining where to cut the end of this slab off.
I want to leave myself some wiggle room so I can slide this back and forth a little bit when I get to the shop. So I'm going to cut it right there. Done. And these slabs with shipping and everything involved are in the thousands of dollars. So that money cut is going to be a big one. I got to make sure to get it right. Well, to my way of thinking, there's money cuts and then there's money cuts. To me, these are a particular kind of money cuts that I call a Billy Joel money cut, because when you make a cut like this, you walk away a fool or a king. There's a good bit of tension in these elm slabs, so I drive a shim into the curve, keep the wood from binding so tightly as I make this cut. Ooh, baby, that wood's got an opinion. But with a sharp blade, a good battery, and a bit of persistence, those cuts are history. And the amazing thing is, with a job like this, pieces like this end up as scrap. But I'm going to find a cool place for these to live too. And I had these slabs shipped to the project site because I lacked room to store them at the Next Level Carpentry shop in between the delivery time and now when I'm actually working on the slabs. Yes! I'm more settled now that I have the slabs back in the shop in familiar surroundings to do this somewhat nerve-wracking work because the tools and the lighting are more familiar and less distracting. And job one is to make sure the orientation marks I put on these pieces on the job site line up here so that everything is in the right position to do the joint. And if I were doing a more typical live edge joinery project, I'd start by making a pattern with whatever sort of wave I wanted in it. But because I'm working with these two particular slabs, I need to start the pattern off the contour of the wood and not make the joint the contour of the pattern. So the first step in that operation is to trim the sapwood off of these slabs. And rather than use the bandsaw, because everybody doesn't have one of those, I'm just going to use a jigsaw. And the goal here is to remove all the sapwood and follow the growth rings on the slab. So I'll choose this growth ring right here as a guide for my cut. I think Bosch still makes a version of this 1582 variable speed barrel grip jigsaw, but they've got a cleaner, sleeker design. The important thing is that I'm using the blade on the orbital action. It helps clear the chips out of the cut. You can't quite see it, but the blade is cutting like this rather than just straight up and down. I've got the blower on to blow chips away from it. And you can see I'm using a very aggressive blade for this cut. You gotta love what a high-speed video clip can do to speed up a cut like this. And it's kind of hard to imagine that a wavy cut like that is exactly what I'm after. Once that initial rough cut is made, I'll just pivot the pieces around, prop them up and overlap them to see if I want to make any adjustments for the fit before I set about making the pattern. And naturally, the contours aren't going to match perfectly from piece to piece, but if I nest the bump and the knot and a few other features, it'll disguise the joint nicely. If I were just making a slab for a tabletop or a door, it'd be less complicated at this stage, but because I'm making doors, I need to plan and lay out where the cuts for the individual doors are going to be. So I transfer marks from my cardboard site pattern to the lower slab and then work on the offset shift between the lower slab and the upper slab. And the layout and planning work at this stage are still fairly approximate, and I give myself quite a margin of error for adjustments as I dial in both the joint and the cuts.
My main areas of focus are the baboon nose and the grain structure near the center of the slab. After positioning the lower slab over the upper slab, I draw a cut line to trim off sapwood and get an initial rough fit of the two slabs.
And I'm pretty pleased with this orientation. It removes all the sapwood off the upper slab. It aligns these two grain features here kind of in a sweeping continuation across the joint, etc. The biggest difference is the deviation between fairly straight grain here and a deep dip here. But I think in the big picture, that's going to go away nicely. So I can make a preliminary cut on the second slab along this common line and test the visuals and see if that's where I want to dial in for the pattern.
A project like this is loaded with bold money cut decisions, and in what is arguably a bold move, I've decided that for a little better grain match and highlighting features in the wood, I'm going to trim off about another 3 inches of this edge of the bottom slab. This will make it jive up better and include a little more of the nice grain feature up here, at the expense of some rather straightforward grain in this area. It's a bold cut and a bold move and a command decision, but that's what I'm going to go with, so let's see how it works out. I rotate the slabs and then draw a line about 3 inches in from the wavy slab edge that I'll use as a cut line, and get started with the cut. This is a classic case where fingers can get cut off. It's a huge mistake to feel underneath here while I'm sawing to make sure I'm not cutting into the bottom piece and end up cutting my fingers. You got to pay attention here and shut the saw off to check it, to feel your way through it, or it's the last time you'll ever do it. This is definitely a case of where the scrap is just as cool as the piece, and I wonder what I'll do with that. Now, in an unusual move, I climb onto my saw top to look straight down at the grain matchup to see how it's looking.
Well, after a fair amount of flipping, flopping, and head scratching, I came up with an orientation for these two pieces I'm pretty happy with. And since there's going to be deviation in the grain between the two slabs anyways, I decided to swing this cut a little wide here, kind of go off grain a little bit, and that way bring out a little bit more of the baboon nose in this area here. And one of the factors is how close this dip in this slab gets to the sapwood on that slab. That's one of the pivotal factors in this orientation. But in the end, I think it's going to be amazing. This pencil mark is the pattern line from the lower piece, and this is the grain I want to capture. So I'll make an alteration on this piece and then transfer it to the other one. And as long as I'm moving this way from this line, it's just a matter of cutting that extra material off the other piece. If I go this way, I'll end up short and with a gap. A project like this is about half and half art and science. The science part of it is the mechanics of getting the joint cut and glued and making sure it stays together. And the art part is constant evaluation of the orientation of the cuts and the grain and the pieces, and ultimately the doors that they'll be cut into. And this adjustment to follow the grain is the art part, because ultimately this has to be visually appealing. And here I go again with yet another money cut on these elm slabs. And with each successive cut, my options for a way out diminish significantly. And there's another cut that's hard to believe that it's actually right. And with this step, I transfer the alternate contour from the second slab back to the first one so that I can rough trim the edge.
And there it is, the rough cut live edge joint. If I was doing epoxy, I'd just separate these and pour that in there and be good. But this is live edge joinery and not a river joint. So after all that manipulating, evaluating, configuring, and trimming, I'm ready to actually start the pattern process, which is the key to making this whole thing work.
In this sequence, showing the final result on the slabs, along with the pieces that were cut away, kind of lends an interesting perspective to the whole live edge joining process, don't you think? You know, I got to thinking, it's really too bad that they don't sell elm at the local big box lumber yard, because I could just take these pieces here, I throw them on the rack, and they'd blend in with all the other 2x4s I got there. And I'm pretty sure any sensible person that looks at these two cuts and is told that's exactly what they're supposed to look like is going to laugh me right out of the shop. But the fact is, this is exactly what I need at this stage of the game. And with these rough cuts made and the general contour in line, it's time to start working on the pattern. I usually have scrap melamine around for making templates like this, but for whatever reason, this time I don't. So I'm cutting a 20-inch strip off this full sheet to make the live edge patterns for these slabs. And I can easily justify the cost of sacrificing a whole new sheet of this material to make these templates out of, because of the time saving I get in making patterns for the live edge joinery. And a couple quick rips give me the two 10-inch strips I need for making the template. And that right there is a visual answer to the question of why I don't have an official outfeed table cluttering up my shop. My specially designed custom roller stands take the place of a massive table and are super convenient for cutting jobs like this, plus a wide range of other operations. I'm not 100% sure that I've got my audio issues solved yet, so I'm going forward tentatively and asking your forbearance with the mix-up between the voiceover and what you're seeing. But with the pieces of the pattern made or rough cut out of the sheet, the first thing I need to do is to trace the line of one of these sides onto a piece of melamine and cut that side of the pattern. And I choose to use the upper slab to begin the pattern making process because the jigsaw curve is just a little smoother and a bit closer to the final contour that I'm after. Make sure there's a little bit of pattern extending by each end of the slab, and then I'm cutting away about the same amount of material at each end and keeping the biggest bulge as close to the edge of the pattern as possible. That keeps the pattern itself at a maximum width for stiffness and rigidity as I go forward. And a SharpWriter pencil gives me a nice fine line the entire length of this slab. I switched to a finer blade in the jigsaw to minimize chipping on the edge of this pattern, which saves me work getting it smoothed out and tuned up in the next step.
And now, my Bosch jigsaw and that fine-tooth blade make quick work of cutting the first of the two matching templates for this live edge joinery process. And you can see that I try to follow real close to the line because that minimizes sanding as I smooth up and tune up these patterns in the next steps.
The jigsaw edge of this pattern follows the general contour, but I want it to be smoother with less jittery contours for the final joint. So I'll take a few different sanding blocks and grits of sandpaper, starting with 36 grit and ending at probably 80 to smooth up the contour of the pattern. These rounded rubber sanding blocks aren't good for much, but they are good for this. And what makes them useful is putting the sandpaper on backwards and using this general curve for shaping stuff like this. And a combination of a curved and a straight sanding block helps me to clear up the convex and the concave curves on this edge in pretty short order. And the goal is to make curves and varied, but not look jittery or like a mistake. And after a few minutes of going by feel and by eye, I've come up with a smooth and varied contour for the profile on this template that I'm happy with. So I switch out my sanding blocks and smooth it up with the 80 grit paper for a final verification. And the most aggravating thing about this is I can't tell when my audio is working or not. I can't tell if it's a loose wire, a bad signal, or what. I've got a rubber band on my little sending unit. The light doesn't blink, but the audio can be all corrupted, and I'll end up shooting a whole sequence to find out at the end that I didn't get any of the audio. So that's extremely aggravating. But this template is the first half of the patterns I need for getting this joint to work out. And you can see here how this refined contour now overlays the rough cut I made with the jigsaw on the edge of the slab. So that's a good thing. And all I need is about a 1/16 of an inch of wood sticking beyond the pattern so that I can flush trim this up with a router, and I'll have a perfectly clean, smooth jointed edge for the matchup. There's a little situation here that is basically the crux of this whole process, and I'll try to explain it now. In a world without geometry, I could just fix the template to one piece of this wood and then clamp the other piece an inch away and then run a router bit down between the two pieces. The bearing would follow this pattern and would trim both of these edges. But the hitch is a geometric reality. That means that even though both of the curves are smooth, the curve on this side is not the same as the curve on this side. And the difference in the radius of the two curves are the difference in diameter that is equal to the router bit being used. If this were being cut with a CNC, the same router bit could be used, and it would just plot to one side of the pattern line for one cut and then plot to the opposite side of the pattern line for the other cut, and the pieces would mate perfectly. But this is being done with old-fashioned CNC, which means carpenter navigated cutting, not computer navigated control. So I've got to compensate for any router bit diameter when making the two cuts. In the shop with carpenter navigated cutting, I get around that problem by making two templates that are a mirror image of each other, an exact mirror image with an airtight fit between the two. And that right there is the crux of this whole live edge joinery process. With the first side of the template complete, I'll trace it out on the other piece of melamine there, and then use a similar process of sanding and fitting until I've got the airtight fit that I'm after between the two templates. It's pretty tedious, but it is doable, and it's a lot easier to get an airtight fit on the templates than it is to start routing on the wood and trying to get an airtight fit on material that's 1.25 inches thick. And it's another situation where melamine coated MDF is the perfect material. And keep in mind that these templates aren't identical templates, they're mirror image templates. So I have to clamp them accordingly to get the right contour on the second half of the template. And now it's back to the jigsaw to cut this mirror image profile line. I dialed down the speed of the cut, and I followed the line a lot more closely and a lot more accurately in an effort to leave just the pencil mark itself. And the better I do at this, the less sanding I need to do to get the fit I need for these two templates. And that fit's not bad for starters, but this has all got to end up with tolerances that'll be forgiven by a glue line. So I've got a little bit of work to do. These two patterns are coming together nicely with a little bit of attention, but to fine tune it for the final fit I need, I'm going to use a process I'll call lapping.
To get these two pieces to match up accurately, I'll use a piece of sharp 80 grit sandpaper, just slipping it in between the two templates and then sliding it back and forth to sand off all the nibs on the second template so that it matches all the curves on the first template. To make the lapping process easier, I cut notches in a couple scrap 2x4s with the miter saw and then use a chisel to pry out the chunks. Then I put the 2x under the slabs and templates, lining up the space over these notches. With this arrangement, the sandpaper slides easily between the templates and really speeds up the lapping process. I go back and forth through the slot a number of times, applying pressure on the joint so the paper cuts off all irregularities between the two pieces.
With a little bit of effort and an 80 grit sanding disc, it doesn't take real long before a 10,000th feeler gauge fits pretty uniformly through the space between these templates from one end to the other. It's a little tight on one end, so I make one final adjustment before calling it done. And with a little bit of clamp pressure, I'm thinking those things just might be airtight. And a couple of orientation marks just remind me of how everything needs to be when it's all said and done. I'll flush trim the bottom half of the slab first. So I leave it up on the spacer blocks and then adjust the template so that it cuts off at least a little bit all the way along the edge. Then I use some small brads and a magnetic tack hammer to tack the corners of the template in place because that ends up outside the finished doors. And then use these long-jawed vice grips to secure the panel in the middle so that it doesn't flex during the flush trim routing process. And you can see here at the one end, I'm trimming barely a 1/16, but in a few spots, I'll be trimming almost a 1/4 inch off from the jigsaw edge when it gets routed flush to the template. But with a high speed and a slow, steady approach, I can remove that material without any trouble.
I'm using this massive white side flush trim router bit because its full 1/2 inch shank keeps it vibration free on a heavy cut like this. Plus, the large cutting diameter is less prone to splintering. I approach this heavy cut cautiously by first climb cutting along the edge to remove the bulk of the material that needs to come off, and then I always finish up with a slow final pass in the proper routing direction. For work like this, I really like the feel and the power of this old Bosch 1618 E-handled router. I really wish they still made this model because this one's getting tired and I could use a new one. And I hope I don't have to upgrade to some clunky, awkward two-handled plunge router thing when this one finally bites the dust. When I'm finished, you can see that the template and the workpiece are perfectly flush and smooth, following this wavy live edge joint just like it needs to.
I marked the location of the template on the slab in case I have to come back for it for any reason. And using these marks, I could easily shave off a few more thousandths of an inch somewhere if I needed to make an adjustment before glue up. And because my templates match themselves, the mirror image template now matches perfectly to the first routed edge on the lower slab. Now I've switched the slabs, place and secure the template, and route the mating piece on the second slab. Rinse, lather, and repeat. Only with a very expensive slab of wood, this is a little bit more involved than shampoo. I switched to a different flush trim bit because even though it's smaller diameter, I think it's sharper because it's newer, and I hope it doesn't fight the cut so bad. Yeah, it works like a charm, and it helps that the pattern is a lot closer to the rough cut on the slab, so I'm not trimming off as much on this slab either. Guess it's time to retire that old white side bit after all these years and get a new one to replace it, because it's a wood cutting beast. And of course my audio is still out, so I'm going to look like I've dubbed this over like the original language was Chinese, but that pass completes the routing process, and I'm going to give these two slabs a test fit and see how well this went. Fingers crossed. Well, there it is, the initial fit up, moment of truth, and the results look acceptable to me. I've got to clean up some pencil marks and apply a little clamp pressure to see if any final tune-up is necessary. It's not bad like this, right? Pretty respectable joint, considering I've done nothing but routed that and butt these two pieces together. Watch what happens when I align the slabs. Probably a bit of clamp pressure. And keep in mind, that's just wood to wood. There's no glue in that joint yet, so I think it's gonna fly. All right, guys, here we go. A different day, a different shirt, and a different audio setup. I'm just yelling at the camera and hoping that the speaker or the microphone in there picks this up enough so that you can tell what I'm talking about. I've got this slab all clamped up and positioned, and I want to show you this. This is the first time right out of the router templates, and I needed to assess the joint to see if it was ready for glue or not, and I will show you my assessment process, and then you can tell me if you think it's ready. I've got an old set of feeler gauges here, and I'm going to slip this one out. That is 1/1000th of an inch. Don't ask me what the metric equivalent of that is, because I don't know, but oh no, there's a 1/1000th of an inch gap in there. Oh, not very long though. Actually, that's kind of flimsy. I'm going to go with 4/1000ths and see what I find. Oh, there's about 2 inches there of a 4/1000ths gap. There's a little bit more there. That's 4/1000ths. Most of this I got nothing. There's a spot there that 4/1000th falls right in. I'm going to jump up to 6/1000ths and see. Yep, yeah, I'm afraid I got a 6/1000th of an inch gap in there right by the baboon nose. What do you think? Should we glue it or try again? I think I'm going to glue it. Because for the most part, other than this little bit at 6/1000ths of an inch, I think that's more than acceptable. Another thing about the gap that I do have here is that when I do this the final time, I'll add more clamps and more pressure to pull that together. And the other thing is, there's no sense in clamping up this whole thing. So I've taken my cardboard pattern and laid it out on here with the live edge lined up at the bottom and having it slid back and forth where I intend this to be. And you can see I've pencil marked out the outline of the entire slab and then divided it up where the doors go. So before I clamp it up, I'm going to rough cut this one more time, yet another money cut, give myself an extra inch, inch and a half all the way around. That'll make this top piece narrower. It will have a little bit of flex in it and help to the two pieces to conform to each other. Not that I really need that much more on that glue joint, but I do want it as tight and as invisible as possible. It did take me a bit of time to position these slabs next to each other to minimize the gap between the pieces. And I want to preserve that alignment when I go for the final clamping during glue up. So I'll add small tick marks along the joint that will help with alignment. I'll also use the tick marks to plunge a few biscuits into this joint. And I'll say that the biscuits aren't going to do anything to add strength to the joint. It's going to be ridiculously strong as it is because of the thickness of the piece and the fact that it's not a straight line that focuses stresses on the glue joint. But biscuits do help align the faces of slabs like this during glue up and really speed up the process. I need to pay attention to where the ultimate cut lines for the doors are going to be so they don't have a biscuit sticking out the edge of a door and regret it later. And with that bit of homework taken care of, I can remove the clamps, then add a guideline for these cuts that will rough out or oversize the panel. And this extra margin allows me to make adjustments to the actual position of the doors on the slab, and it allows places for fasteners for securing the slab during the flattening process. And as you can see, there's a fair amount of cutting involved here, so I'm not going to punish my little Makita cordless, but I'm going to get out a 6.5 skill worm drive saw. I've literally cut miles and miles of lumber with this saw or one like it, and it'll make quick work of slicing this elm like it was butter. Yeah, maybe butter coming out of the freezer, but butter. And as dry as these slabs are, there's still a decent bit of tension in that wood from the root flare on the tree, etc. But we got this. All I can say is, I hope I did that right. Yep, looks good. Now it's time for biscuits. I got nothing for gravy, but biscuits I can do. I use a cut-off scrap to center up the biscuit slot between the faces of these slabs. And because the curving nature of the edge, I'll have to double check my biscuit size and might have to use number 10 biscuits in number 20 slots to make this all work out. But overall, the biscuits will help the alignment during glue up considerably. That might not necessarily look like it, but I'm being very protective of these sharp routed edges so they don't get damaged and spoil the glue line. And I'll have to do some fussing to make sure these all fit, but I can easily do that by marking the biscuit in one slot and slipping it into the other and see if it covers up the pencil mark. It's going to take about an extra 1/8 of an inch. So I think I'll just set the slot cutting depth a bit deeper and replunge these so that everything works out. And I'll admit that I misjudged the effect of the curve on the depth of the biscuits completely, because only one of this dozen actually fit without replunging. And with a couple of love taps, the joint disappears again under clamp pressure. And I add what I'll call a gospel glue-up line here, because a very slight shift in orientation of these pieces from side to side really amplifies the glue joints on some of the humps in this joint. And I want to get it right here in the glue-up. Well, this is going to get a little messy, so time for a shop apron. Actually put cardboard on the top of my work surface here to make mess cleanup a little less trouble and a little less urgent. Titebond 3 is my glue of choice for 2 reasons, actually 3. First reason is the color is really good with this elm. I could put a blob of glue on there and when it dries you probably hardly see it. That, and it's a little runnier, it's got a little more open time, so I can adjust things and get everything fit up the way I want. And the third reason is when this slab is all done, it'll be thickness sanded, and I don't want that glue joint swelling and sticking up through the finished surface after this is all done. And Titebond 3 is really resistant to that. So that's that. It's going to be a long glue-up sequence here. So I'm just going to talk as I go through it. I'm pulling all the biscuits out because I want to get good glue distribution before I actually glue the biscuits. And that way I can just glue one side, press it together, and get all that done, then add the biscuits later. I'm putting a very healthy bead of glue along both sides of this. Note, I'm just using the applicator tip that comes on the bottle. Quick and easy, albeit messy. That looks pretty good. You can see a void by each biscuit. Not for long. This is all looking good. Just add a little biscuit to the slot, or just add a little glue to the slot, more glue to the biscuit. Like I said, this is going to get messy, but that's all right. I've switched my modus operandus and we'll just add glue to the biscuit slots on the other piece before I shove this together, which is not too difficult. Lay that baby down or it'll fall down. Come back here. Live and in color, folks. One glue up with all its potential warts and challenges right in front of your very eyes. Today on Next Level Carpentry, step right up. Got a 3-ring circus going on. That should do it. I'm throwing a little more glue on this joint. There's a couple spots that look a little dry, like it's soaked up extra in between the two pieces. I can handle too much glue, but I can't handle not enough. There it is. That's that. Busy, they say, is a one-arm paper hanger. I'll put the middle clamp underneath. That'll keep this from taco shelling on me. The gospel mark there is lined up nicely. This is where the sawdust comes in, the glue cleanup. And I'll be milling away about 1/8 inch of thickness off of each face of this. So if I get a stain from glue on a pipe clamp, it's not too big of a deal, but I try to get that scraped out and cleaned up at this stage, kind of as a force of habit. Just a matter of good habit and good practice to do that. This is the front side of the doors. I probably won't be able to clean it up on the back. I think I'm going to risk it. If I was going to have a fracas, that would have been it right there. Kind of doing this on the fly, but notice I've got 100% glue squeeze out all the way along the face of that joint. That tells me I won't have any glue starved places. That'll make the finish look funny. There's a few thousandths difference in places where these faces aren't quite flush, but well within the margin of error I have between the slab's current thickness and the 3/4 inch it'll end up as. I can take an extra clamp and switch the pressure from one clamp to the other, take the clamp off, clean out the glue, and then go back to that clamp. That way I keep from getting iron stains on the wood. Here again, it's a matter of practice. I'm a little reluctant to show this, but I've got to flip this piece over one more time because the other side's the front. I want to make sure everything's perfect on that side. I will make a note. I'll tell you though that when flipping a slab like this, I'm very careful to use clamps that are on the bottom. These top clamps, lifting like this, that clamp can pop off, and that is a disaster, let me tell you. I could probably sell this as modern art. What do you think? There's a slight hump on this end here in the joint. The rest of it's all well within the flattening tolerance I've got built in here. So I'm going to add a clamp with opposing pressure. Try to make that adjustment while this dries. And by altering the tension between the top clamp and the bottom clamp, I can get that to lay flat quite easily. There might be some spring back when this is all dry and comes out of the clamps, but this will get me headed in the right direction. And I'll just add my timestamp here, 5 o'clock p.m. That way I can give this at least 3 hours. I'll probably let this sit overnight just because the glue up is so important. I'll take a minute here while the glue is drying to ask viewers that if you like the kind of content you're seeing in this video, that you'd consider subscribing to Next Level Carpentry if you haven't already. Most of the videos have audio that's a lot better than this one, and future videos will have better audio too. So subscribe if you like this stuff. There's plenty more here on Next Level Carpentry. I think I'll run this video as a live premiere on the channel so I can do a thumbs up bump for the video. Anybody that likes the video enough to give it a thumbs up, check the thumbs up count right now, and on 5, give it a thumbs up if you like it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. Hope there's a decent jump. I don't know what the record is, but some videos will get 100 or so thumbs up in that instant, which is kind of cool. And I appreciate it because it lets the folks over there at YouTube know that you're watching and stuff's happening here at Next Level Carpentry. And during this break in the action, I'll remind you that the tools and supplies you see used in this video on this project and other stuff you see around the shop here is available through an Amazon influencers page that's linked in the video description below. Everything on that influencers page is the same low online cost you expect, but Amazon pays ad fees to Next Level Carpentry for telling you about that stuff. So if you can't find it locally or at a better price elsewhere, you can always get it through those links, and I appreciate it. All the t-shirts I normally wear, but not this one, are available through Teespring, as well as posters, signs, and stickers from around the shop, and Next Level Carpentry mugs, etc. Linked in the video description below. This t-shirt is from the folks at Starbond, and viewers can use the exclusive offer code NLC at checkout from starbond.com for 15% off any of their great products. They're the ones that I use and recommend here in the shop. Great products, great company, check it out in the video description. So I think that'll wrap that up for now. I'm going to stand here and watch this glue dry for another 12 hours and get back to you when it looks like it's dry. After that, I'll pull the clamps and move on. Dry, glue, dry. Dry. That's not working. After letting this thing set up overnight, I can unclamp it. It's pretty unclimactic. Just a big piece of wood with a funny looking glue line. But I'm very pleased with the way it came out. A slight variance in the flatness of this panel is easily within the tolerances I have for getting it flattened with extra thickness. The panel's 1 1/16 thick, so it needs to end up at just a skosh over 3/4 of an inch. So there's plenty of material to work with in. I transferred the pencil marks from the face of the piece onto the edges where they'll survive the flattening and thicknessing process. And I use a couple V's to mark the face of this piece because I want to preserve the grain features of this face. So I'll probably take a little less material off here than here to get the final thickness. If I mill too far down from this face, grain features like this cool string of knots and of course the baboon nose might change as material is removed. And I'd rather not have that happen. I use a putty knife sharpened like a card scraper to level up the faces at the glue line to get a preview of what this is going to look like when it's sanded and finished. And with that little bit of cleanup on there, this baby's looking pretty fine. And I want to show you something. A pump up spray bottle filled with alcohol will give you a great sneak peek at where this thing is going to end up. What do you think of them apples? That should be one remarkable piece when it's complete, considering that at this point it's only sanded to about 80 grit. And I'll take this up to 320 before I put the gel varnish finish on it. Personally, I'm hoping that the designer and the customer agree with me that this will be mission accomplished for creating the live edge doors for that island cabinet. Considering that this is elm and it was a pretty fast growing tree, I'm really pleased that this panel came out as flat as it did. If this was something other than cabinet doors, very tight tolerances, I might just finish this slab off with patience and a belt sander. But since it needs to be so flat and so true, I'm taking it to the shop of a very capable local cabinet maker where it will get flattened on a CNC and then thinned down and trued up on a wide belt thickness sander before I cut the panel into 4 sections for the doors. Well, hi guys. I've returned to my client's home so that you can see what 2 large elm slabs joined with a live edge joint look like when cut into 4 cabinet doors, live edge cabinet doors for this waterfall island cabinet. After the thickness sanding process that you just saw, which took these doors up to 220 grit, I finished this by going over it with 320 and then a couple generous coats of gel polyurethane to get a permanent durable finish that'll protect these wide pieces of solid wood from twisting and warping over time. I'm just going to read from my notes here and tell you that all the steps involved to make these doors from that full slab that was put together in the video, that'd be content for a few more hours of video, but unfortunately I really had to focus on the process so attentively to get it right that I couldn't risk making the slightest mistake with the distractions of shooting video. I apologize for that, but it's my reality of working for discerning clients without a video production team. If I could just focus on the work and have somebody hovering around with a camera, I could shoot that process and make 2 or 3 more videos out of it. But as it is, here they are installed. I did shoot a bit of video of the finishing process as well as the actual installation of the doors, and I produced a couple of videos for Patreon with that content. And speaking of Patreon, I want to give a special shout out to the growing list of patrons. I really appreciate everybody on this list who go above and beyond for Next Level Carpentry. And I want to remind newer patrons, there's a number of them. I haven't even had a chance to greet you guys yet, but I know you're there. And I just want to remind you that you have access to the 2 videos I just talked about, the installation and the finishing, and then a whole other playlist of behind the scenes stuff from the Next Level Carpentry shop. So if anybody's interested in that, there's a link to Patreon in the video description, and sign up if it's something you're motivated to do. I'd appreciate it. And I endeavor to get everybody's name on this list so you get at least a little shout out in the credits for what you're doing for the channel. Let's see, page 2. If you look closely in this panning shot, and after watching the live edge joinery process from start to finish, you should be able to pick out that live edge joint in this slab. I'll tell you though that the comment I hear from people who walk in and see this as finished doors without seeing the joinery process is, man, that was a huge tree, because there's not a typical straight line joint running across the face of these door slabs. These 4 doors are hanging on bloom concealed hinges. The soft close function of the hinges pulls them closed, where magnets on the touch latches hold them in place with a subtle positive click. And now that you've seen how to do live edge joinery on slabs of wood to disguise the joint and omit a straight glue line going through beautiful panels like this. And what these doors look like and how they work, I think you'll agree with my client and her designer that it's mission accomplished on this island door project for Next Level Carpentry. So I guess it's time to cue up the Mission Impossible soundtrack and tell you, as always, until next time, thanks for watching. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Northaby's Auction House, where I'm proud to unveil, for the first time ever, to a worldwide audience, the famed sculpture by the woodworker known as Chip. This is his latest commissioned piece, entitled Glue Globs on Cardboard. Thank you for attending this event. Live online auction to commence heretofore shortly for those interested in acquiring this one-of-a-kind monumentous piece of pre-recycling, post-historical, Art Nouveau, aliphatic resin, and cellulose composite material board piece, where its fate as it moves towards antiquity rests on you, the generous but discerning auction attendee. Hey, Chip, what are you doing out there in the shop? What? Nothing, just cleaning up. Come on, buddy, we got work to do. And would you grab that lousy piece of cardboard from the shop, you know, the one that's got the varnish and glue globs all over it? That thing needs to go to the dump. And we need to get a move on. Yeah, I got it. So much for my 15 minutes of fame. If anybody wants this piece, meet us at the landfill.